These two phenoms might be cousins, but they actually hit their forehands extremely differently, and it leads to different strengths and weaknesses around the court, which we're going to break down today. Vachereau leaning more into a shoulder whip driven action, a la Nadal, which gives you more advantages with height and spin, and Rinderknecht leaning into more of a chest driven, hand on the ball style swing, a la Federer, really good at cutting off balls early, diagonally, and then finishing those points at net. So first, we're going to quickly go over their strokes to show you the mechanical differences that produce those pros and cons, and I'm going to show you them in match situations. What Vachereau is good at, and then maybe not so good at, and what Rinderknecht is good at, and maybe not so good at, so that you know when you're developing your forehand exactly what to do if you want topspin and height and racket head speed, and exactly what to do if you want to take the ball early with accuracy and rush your opponent without feeling unstable yourself. So starting with Vachereau, this is what a swing looks like that is optimized for topspin. More elbow space in the back here. During early rotation, that shoulder rolls back more, and we can see the counterbalancing force where, look, the left elbow is protruding back as well. This entire scapular complex right here is supporting the shoulder as inertia drags it back while the trunk drags it forward. And even deep into the swing, the shoulder is in external rotation. Look at all this layback. Look how far down the racket head is. And then, of course, we see internal shoulder rotation that whip around the thing people usually refer to as the windshield wiper through the contact. With Arthur Rinderknecht's forehand, it is a swing optimized for control, intercepting the ball early with accuracy. So we're going to see a lot less elbow space early. And then watch the back. A lot less retraction of the scapula here. So these shoulder blades didn't really pull together. Instead, what's happening here is he is pressing with the chest on the right side. So watch the elbow. It's going to very quickly disappear. So that elbow catches up to the trunk very quickly. We're pressing early, resisting that backwards action. So we are loading less stretch into the back, less stretch into the shoulder. But the result of that is it is much easier and stabler to deliver the hand onto the ball. And this is just a spectrum. You know, more stretch, more rotation in the shoulder, more whip through the contact, but of course, more difficult to control and more difficult to time, versus less stretch and more stability through the shoulder, easier to get the hand precisely on the ball, easier to take it early, but harder to generate that 4,000 M's topspin Rafa-like ball, which Vachereau used quite effectively throughout the tournament, whereas Rinderknecht won most of his points a la Federer, cutting balls off diagonally and using this simple swing to intercept the ball cleanly and go to net. So let's watch Rinderknecht in action, and it starts right from the return. So you see that return? So when we watch a return like that, the amount of motion through the shoulder is so minimal. This elbow, it never gets behind the back, and it's pressed forward across the body immediately. So this is just pure stability, no lag, no external rotation, no retraction. We are simply taking the hand in the racket head and placing it through the ball. See how he's almost swinging across his body there? There's a tiny little rotation from the trunk just to jumpstart it. So this simplest effective hand on the ball, chest pressing style is amazing on the forehand return. And what you're going to see is that his neutral tennis, he's leaning in. It's based on leaning in. He's leaning in. So look, again, look at the weight transfer. Back foot to front foot. He's always leaning in on all of his shots. And the reason he's always leaning in is that he's not using as much rotation and elastic shoulder whip. And so he's leaning in to get the same velocity. And he's directing from side to side. And then he's always looking to cut the ball off early diagonally. These simple mechanics make it so that when you take time away from yourself, it's totally fine. You can still make this shot with good accuracy and finish your points at net. And this is very similar to the way Federer used to play. So going over to Vachereau here, you're going to notice a lot less leaning in, especially on this first shot here. So Rinderknecht probably would have been leaning in here, but Vachereau doesn't. It's just not quite how he plays. And because he has more shoulder whip, he has access to a high, heavy rally ball in more of this negative balance. Now, I've written all about balance. You can read this article, Positive, Negative, and Neutral Balance, exactly how it works in tennis. And you can subscribe to our email list there so you get in-depth articles like this as I write them. We call this negative balance where you're leaning back as you hit. And it only works with an elastic shoulder and great hip rotation. We're going to see it again here. He hit that ball great. And now this is a short ball. This is absolutely something Rinderknecht would be leaning in on. He plays it in neutral balance as more of a neutral ball. And then, ultimately, because he resets neutral, ends up losing this point to a drop shot. But what I want to point out is when you have great shoulder mechanics here, what you can do is, first of all, you can get out of situations like this. So the shoulder rotation whip, this is crazy amount of negative balance. And he manages to keep the point neutral by getting enough topspin to get the ball this high. Then, again, this is just neutral balance. He's not really leaning on this ball, maybe leaning a slight bit, takes over the point, and then again, because his hips and his shoulder are so elastic, yeah, he leans in a little, but that's mostly a neutral balance winner. So it's not bad to play tennis in neutral balance if you have an elastic shoulder, and that's more what the points look like for someone with more of an elastic shoulder rotation-driven mechanics, as opposed to the press with the chest early, like Rinderknecht does, where you'd be leaning in on these balls and trying to take them early and get the net. So now we get to see these guys play each other, and I'm going to show analogous points to show the strengths and weaknesses of these contrasting styles. Here's the first shot. Look at that shot. Vachereau off of his shoestrings. This one is the one that you could have done either way. Rinderknecht would lean in, Vachereau whips it with his shoulder. But this is the shot that really only the shoulder whippy guys like Rafael Nadal can hit a shot with this much quality from that position. Now, Rinderknecht hits it pretty well, but not good enough because, again, when you have this much topspin and net clearance, this line is a lot easier to hit. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to analogous point from Rinderknecht and show you that those simpler mechanics can't produce this quality off of that shoestring ball. So here we are. Rinderknecht has a similar shot where he's backed up, and notice because he's a very hand-on ball, press early guy, shoulder doesn't really roll back, and it's not like this is a bad shot, but the amount of RPMs is so much lower that this is so much easier to time off the ground than the shot that Vachereau gave him on that other point. And so Vachereau's in control. Well, he's got another chance here. Maybe we can create some whip, create some height, make it hard to read off the ground. And what do we see here? Oh, look at that. A little bit more scapular retraction, a little bit more backwards roll of the shoulder, and a little bit more of a whip. The problem is it's just not nearly as practiced, and so the quality isn't nearly as high as what Vachereau produces with that pattern. But one thing that you do see in the best players in the world is that even though they have their one style, they at least have an intuition for how to do the opposite. So how to be more stable, shorter in the court, or when you really need a shoulder rip, how to at least activate it a little bit. And this adaptive response with your mechanics, it's actually something you can practice. When we train people, we work with this all the time on switching on a dime between moving in and that stability, and then if you're falling back, getting more of that whip. We're running classes this winter if you want to train with us in New Jersey. I'll link that below. There's a survey you can fill out to let us know kind of what your schedule's like. We put you in situations to make these kind of things habit, so you don't have to think about your mechanics while you play. And one such situation, which is always at the core of when we work with people, is this one. The high floating short approach. And this really punishes this style of technique. The more shoulder stretch, the more shoulder roll, the more this lags backwards, the harder this ball is to time. And it's not like this is a terrible shot, but it's just not good enough at this level, of course. But if you try this, you might just shank the approach. And it's the same principle where, Rinderknecht's very simple chest press, hand-on ball mechanics. That's the stroke that really, really succeeds at taking this ball on the rise early, either deflecting it to here with accuracy, leaning in and following it to net. When you have to pay the shoulder timing tax, so more stretch, more elastic, more velocity and spin from back here, but harder to time, you don't want to pay that tax on a ball like this, because then you have to do this. Wait for the ball to go up and then start coming down so that you actually can time it. And then your racket has so much vertical action, it's very difficult to probe the depth. Federer could probably put this ball like here and here. And, Rinderknecht could probably do similar, maybe here and here. When you have a very simple hand action on this ball, you have a lot more precision. And that's a lot better for this situation. And the whip is less appropriate. And so, put yourself in this situation all the time, and then put yourself in this situation backed up all the time, and you'll naturally learn how to develop both. So we see this from Vachereau here, where it's too shoulder dominant of a swing, right? We're not leaning in nearly as much as we would, as much as Rinderknecht would, and it's short, and we get punished here. And that's kind of a theme. We see him, later in the match. A lot of times he'll hit that same shot and just stay at the baseline and try to take over with his forehand with spin, which makes more sense if you haven't quite practiced how to get out of that shoulder-driven action and into a more Rinderknecht style stability, lean in, hand on ball, pick a target and go action, which is what works inside the court. Now, in this point, we have strength on strength. So serve, return, just a little bit short, not a bad return, but Rinderknecht cutting off diagonally, leaning in, hand on ball with accuracy, like always, following it in. And that's pretty good. Maybe he could have gotten a little deeper. So strength here, elbow, scapular retraction, rolls the shoulder, access to so much spin and whip that even on the back foot here, he can hit this line passing shot. And this is really beautiful to watch. This is a lot of what it looked like watching, Federer against Rafa. It's strength against strength, and we just see, is Rinderknecht just leaning in, taking it early? Can he be just precise enough? Or, can the guy with a little more spin, a little more whip, hit those crazy geometry-defying angles? By the third set, both guys are playing great, and Vasher just played a little better. He had a few more of these, crazy using that shoulder whip to create this angle and velocity that almost shouldn't exist than Rinderknecht did, of leaning on this ball and taking it so early and hitting that precise target. This shoulder whip was just slightly more elastic and accurate than that approach, and that was really it. And that's really what it comes down to with the clashing styles, is can the guy taking over with spin, can he keep the other guy deep and prevent him from leaning in, and when he gets in, can he pass him, or can this guy lean in just enough to take over with good targets and get just enough accuracy and depth using that hand on ball to cut off or make the passing shots too difficult. In the end, there was a razor's edge between them. Vasher ended up getting it.